This week, Tim Morris from Tanium is with us to discuss Tanium's data as a service concept. Then, in the enterprise security news, Cyberint raises $28 million for attack surface detection. RapidFort raises $8.5 million for pre-attack surface detection. We'll talk about it. Managing and monitoring your quantum devices. Making sure you don't lose access to your crypto wallets. All kinds of fun stuff in the news. IBM acquires Rendori. Contrast Security makes some of their tools free. Rumble adds some interesting new features. Again, Microsoft Defender for everyone, and more there. Finally, we'll go to a pre-recorded segment from RSA where Chris Cleveland, CEO of Pixum, and Mehul Ravankar, VP Product Management at Qualys, will discuss stopping phishing attacks and a fresh approach to reducing cyber risk. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
CyberArk is at the forefront of demonstrating how identity security can help prevent and block a ransomware infection before it brings a business down. CyberArk offers protection along every aspect of the attack chain, from the initial intrusion all the way through data exfiltration. Whether you are proactively building your security program or need to restore trust in your IT environment, CyberArk has the experience to help. Learn how at securityweekly.com/CyberArk.
Imagine this scenario. You're out of the office unexpectedly, and a colleague pings you because they need access to some system you have credentials for. Now, my listeners would never send passwords over email or Slack. But what about your coworkers? How many organizations out there are sending logins back and forth in plain text? Worse yet, how many just store all of their logins on a shared spreadsheet? Keeper Security's password management platform locks down logins, payment cards, and more in a patented zero-knowledge encrypted vault. Sign up for a Keeper free trial today. Visit securityweekly.com/Keeper.
Is your team ready to defend against the latest cyber threats? Validate human cyber defense readiness with RangeForce. Sharpen your team's capabilities with a cloud-based platform that takes a real-world, continuous approach to cybersecurity skills development. RangeForce empowers cyber defense readiness at scale, with hundreds of interactive modules, learning paths mapped to industry frameworks, skill assessments, and team-based defensive threat exercises. Visit securityweekly.com/RangeForce to learn more. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy Hydration Day. I actually left my nice branded Yeti water bottle somewhere in RSA and elected not to pay the $50 it would have taken in Lyft rides or Uber rides to go back and get it. So I got a nice new Yeti mug here, and I'm happy. It's a step up from the other one, from 32 ounces to 46 ounces or something like that. It's a lot of water. So always stay hydrated, especially if you're talking for 2 hours straight on a podcast. This is episode 278, recorded on Thursday, June 23rd, 2022. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the master of marketing, the mayor of mayhem, Tyler Shields. How are you feeling, Tyler?
I am doing well. You should have told me you were missing one. I would have sent you a Jupiter One branded one immediately for you to use on every show that you're on.
You can still send it.
Consider it done.
Also joining us is the czar of Zero Trust, the captain of content, Katie Teitler. How are you, Katie?
I'm well, but I'm guessing I am not getting a Jupiter One Yeti bottle.
Yeah,
would you be allowed to?
I'm afraid not.
I'd be allowed to, but I'm guessing, there's certain people who might not want me to have it.
I got to draw the line. I'll hook you up. All right, join us June 29th for a webcast with Tyler Robinson and Bo Bullock to learn how to pivot into the world of crypto security. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast to register with only your name and email. This is not a sponsored webcast, just stuff we're really interested in that we feel like the audience is also really interested in that we want to geek out with you. Don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings at securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right, our first interview today is sponsored by Tanium. And Tim Morris joins us today to talk about breaking through traditional barriers with product data as a service. And we'll explain what that means here in a bit. Tim spent over 20 years at Wells Fargo, wearing all the hats there. Most recently, he led cyber threat engineering and research teams within the information and cybersecurity group within the bank. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you here. I was looking at some of your background, and I started out at U.S. Bank's credit card processor, so I was getting flashbacks.
Yeah, I don't think anybody has in cyber IT has conventional, career paths. Often say some people choose their career, but often their career chooses them, and that was my case. Blue collar guy, I was in manufacturing, and around the Y2K thing, they were asking me to move to different places. The family wanted to stay here in North Carolina where we were at. So I looked, and the largest employer in the area was a bank. So I took a Y2K product, being Unix admin, took a Windows software packaging job, knew nothing about it, not even sure how I got the job, but I got the job and actually became really good at it, which led into a career in reversing malware. Because if you can package and troubleshoot applications that are supposed to work that don't, you can figure out how malware works that shouldn't. So that's kind of where my cybersecurity career started. It wouldn't be until 2009, after the Wachovia Wells Fargo merger, that I moved into a management leadership role and did everything from manage multiple endpoint products, forensics teams, red teaming, like you said, all the things. And it was a lot of fun. And just decided to retire last May, but didn't stay too retired long. Was doing some landscaping. It was a lot of work. Then my wife was making me do landscaping. So I decided to go back to work to get some rest. So anyway, but I've known about Tanium for a long time. We had used it. I'd used it extensively on over 500,000 endpoints. Had a lot of success with it. So it was kind of a natural fit for me to come to Tanium last year.
Yeah, definitely sounds like it. It's and I'm sure you've got so many stories you could tell, but my path was similar. I was on the technical side at Elevon. Somebody gave, again, not sure how I got that job. Somebody gave me the opportunity, and I had an aptitude for it. I wanted to learn everything, and just kind of worked my way from the IT side over to the security side, and eventually got tired of the same networks, the same walls, the same cubicle, and moved into the consulting space myself, and eventually found my way to the vendor side as well.
Right.
So,
it's a lot. It's a lot of fun, and everybody who does this, has to have a passion and curiosity, to see how things, work, how things get broken, how to fix them. We're all problem solvers, and it's just a natural fit for anybody in cybersecurity, because you're trying to protect stuff, and oftentimes it's processes that are broken, or trying to chase the vulnerabilities or chase the broken processes. And so it's just a natural fit for those of us that are so inclined to, go figure out broken stuff and make it work better.
Give me a bit of an idea of your role there at Tanium. Are you on the sales facing side, like kind of like an advisory CISO or something like that, or, sales engineering, or are you more on the customer success side of things?
A little bit of both. We created a globals and verticals, and they brought me in to help advise with the financial services. So my official title is technology strategist, but they call me all kinds of things, like get CTO, office of the CISO. So if I'm doing speaking at any conferences and those kind of things about different cybersecurity topics, how to lead or manage, a cybersecurity team, or how to build a cybersecurity program. So I kind of do consulting. It depends on where I'm at. We officially a few months ago moved into the sales org, but I was in a dual role. But I'm not, I'm not a commission-based employee on the sales side, but I do support the sales teams. I support the marketing teams, but I also do a lot with existing customers, which is a support role. So you can call that customer success. Tanium has a very, very rich technical account management program. I mean, it's kind of founded on that. We're deeply entrenched into our customers to help them be successful. Matter of fact, when I was a customer, my technical account managers were just as much a part of my team. They joined the team meetings. They were there for change controls on the weekend. I mean, they were heavily involved in our success, to make it work. So my role is a bit varied. Again, I'll do some Like last week, I was speaking actually in the Fed space, that kind of outside of financial services. But when you have done this for a long time in a large, complex network, those skills kind of parlay into multiple different industries, verticals, as well as size. I think when I came here and they had me consulting with some small banks, and I would get the scalability questions. Oh yeah, that works great in the lab, but what about 1,000 computers? And I'm used to working with 500,000 computers. So I kind of
bless your heart.
Exactly. It's one of those things like, yes, I run software that will not run on 1,000 computers. I run software that won't run on 100,000 computers. Some will, and they won't get to 250,000 computers. I mean, there's different nuances when you're managing infrastructures that large, just from an IT ops and engineering standpoint, not even getting into the security side of it, even though we all play a part in security. It's difficult. And every time you're deploying something large, besides just getting the scale itself, then you're dealing with the internal politics. I mean, at the bank, we had 8 major lines of businesses, each one bigger than most businesses by themselves, outside. And then dealing in a highly regulated industry, like banking, same would be with healthcare and government entities. It creates its own set of challenges. So sometimes it's very refreshing to get to what I would call small, and I don't mean to insult anybody, to a place that has, say, 5 to 30,000 endpoints, where there it's like, no, that's, if you're managing 5,000 and you're used to being an admin that managed a small, school of less than 1,000, and you get to that, it's a big deal. But it's all relative. I mean, honestly, solving the problems is the same. It's just the types of problems look a little different, a little nuanced, and may take longer or different ways. And of course, the bigger you get, the larger your attack surface gets. So that presents quite a bit of challenges for everyone. IT ops, your SOCs, NOCs, whatever acronym you use, we call it ours a Fusion Center. It presents a lot of challenges to have to manage.
Yeah, I've heard that term. I think Target was the first place I had heard that Fusion Center term.
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember back in the day, I was doing endpoint management, and I'd done a couple things. So first was M&A activity, meaning the banks were notorious for doing acquisitions but not merging. So they did the A part, paint the sign, then move on, and never integrate or merge the systems. So I remember one of the first, when I got heavily involved in Active Directory and trying to doing like all the login scripts, all the startup scripts, all that kind of stuff, and sometimes even doing that in GPOs as a way to manage endpoints. It was quite a chore. It took us 3 years, about 18 months of planning, 18 months of execution, to collapse 280 NT4 domains into 180 Forest. So that's a lot of work, to make that happen and get that, going to everybody set up. And I'm sorry, I was going somewhere. What was the original question? Because that plays into it.
Yeah, the Fusion Center, the term Fusion.
So the Fusion Center, yeah. So what happened is then when we moved into security, our SOC was very, I would call it help desk based, meaning the metrics were measured on how many cases they got closed and the time to close a case. Well, that doesn't work in security. You need to be able to get the thing. And we also suffer from this problem, and we'll get into this with this data broker or data as a service, from visibility. So around 2012, we had a new CISO come in and really change the game on how we did things. At one point, there was talk of taking part of the bank, the security, running a separate company so they could operate under different rules to help protect the bank. And I'd heard other banks trying to do this. But the reason was the visibility. Because you get into situations where you have somebody that owns a console on something and you can't see. You only see what they're allowing to give you. Or whether you're IT ops, you're trying to get patch data, or you're trying to get application logs from somewhere else. It's just disjointed. So what happened is when we got a CISO that got the full board approval and board support, it's like we need to do cybersecurity right. And at this time, large banks were getting hammered with DDoS attacks. I mean, just having outages and having to go through that stuff. It took a couple of years, but we got through that. So they built a Fusion Center, which basically gave us the visibility we needed to be able to work with all lines of business, break down those silos to be able to protect. One of my mantras has always been no managed security. You secure what you don't manage, you can't manage what you don't know. And the problem in cybersecurity was we were told to go manage all this stuff, but we didn't know what's there. We're relying on a CMDB that's broke, asset inventory systems that don't work, dealing with the regulator stuff and auditors and all that kind of stuff, and didn't have that. So when you build a fusion center, which is what, very trendy at the time, and still is, I think a lot of companies are still doing that, is you make sure you get representation from everyone so that they're in the same place. And it also helps with incident response. I know we were talking on a pre-call, this phrase, train like you fight like you train. And that is when you're doing your C-certs, yes, you do the tabletops every quarter. We would do twice a year these war games where we would bring people together, and it would not just be the Fusion Center itself. Yeah, they would have key representation, but it would be folks from, say, network security or folks from line of businesses. We would have 100 people in our huge auditorium playing out these war games, running them over 24 hours. That's when the clock started. We had plenty of prep time, and then we had debrief time afterwards to see and test our systems, meaning test our people, test our processes. Because when you're in the heat, you're being attacked. Yeah.
You're hitting on one of my favorite things here. This is something I love to talk about. I often think is IR training like a sport. Like if you just do the one annual test that PCI or whatever regulation requires from you, you're not going to be very good at the game. When it comes time to play for real. Yeah.
No, you have to get against the goal line and try to defend the goal line multiple times and see if you can go all 4 downs. Right. And you're not going to do that in a tabletop. But when you get in a room and, people get heated, personalities show up, you find out who your good leaders are, you find out people, some of your best technical people are, and you learn the camaraderie because you're sitting there in a safe environment. You're watching data go out. So you got to breach. How are you going to stop that attack, prevent that attack? And we would change the games up. So I remember the worst one everybody got the maddest about was they started the game they already had the golden ticket. And so you're going for half a day trying, it's this person. Oh, we got rid of them. Oh, now it's this account. You're going all day long. So what do you do in that? Because sometimes you're in a prevent mode. Sometimes you're in a detect and respond mode. Sometimes you're just in a triage mode. And you have to understand all those because the playbooks, to go back to your sports analogy, if you haven't played, the 2-minute drill, or you haven't played what the opening, set of plays are going to be, it's not going to be there. And the nice thing was we would graduate those tests. Some were just simple, discovery, some were lateral movement, some were actual, code injections, then there were actual breaches where data. I remember one we stopped. It was like, 8 gigs were going out. We got it after about the first 300 megs, catching it, which is kind of exhilarating. It's like, wow, that's bad that much got, but the fact you actually caught it in seconds, versus most time breaches you discover days or weeks, and you've learned they've been in there for weeks. So that kind of training and having that whole Fusion Center mindset that everybody's a part of it and understanding who the players are going to be and what's going to happen, because it's not just the security practitioners. You've got to get your executives in line of businesses. What are we going to do for a press release? Who are we going to call to say, hey, this is going to go, handle this part of it? Yeah, it's no different almost than problem management. We do this with DR and BCP tests, and sometimes we not as good as we do them better now because they have to have the same rigor on not just paper if you shut down a data center. No, we're going on a Saturday morning, we're going to actually shut one down.
Right.
And see everything move over.
A DR test where you haven't actually thrown the switch,
yes,
you can bank on maybe having 50% of things right.
Yeah, and it's tough. And you learn so much stuff. I have this saying lately, I've been talking about binoculars and mirrors. So from a cyber standpoint, we always use binoculars. We're always looking for intel. You find out what the latest latest attack or breach is, and you focus in on it, right? Matter of fact, you can actually develop your red team operations based upon the latest nation state thing that's going on. Yeah, it's good to understand the actors and the motives and that kind of stuff, but you need to understand the methodologies, the TTPs they're using to do it. But then you have to take those binoculars and turn them into a mirror and look at yourself and say, hey, we need to do this same thing. For example, a supply chain attack. Let's do a supply chain attack against ourselves, zero and outs, whatever it's going to be, whatever the parameters the organization has, and doing those things while they're fun for a while, then they're hard for a while because you get into some really heated discussions because people don't like to be told their baby's ugly, that we got to fix the problem. But when you get to that, in that situation, like a red blue team partnership where everybody is playing the same game to win, it only benefits the entire organization and each person. I mean, the people whose careers were advanced the most and did the most were folks who were in the middle of those fights and learning the most and did learn, meaning they didn't take their toys and go home. And even though they may have got mad in the heat of the battle, they actually used it to learn, to train, like you said in your sports analogy. They're in the weight room a little more. They're doing a few more sprints. But from a technical standpoint.
Let's use that as let's pivot into the topic, the core topic of the conversation. Certainly, I imagine with a lot of those acquisitions, there are a lot of kind of us and them kind of, political situations and emotions, when you have to learn to play with others and work with other groups and give them access to data that you wouldn't typically give them access to. Right. But you came up with this concept of, Tanium gathers some really useful data. And I'll let you explain it, but I understand the TLDR of it is why not share that? Why not leverage that? In other groups, other products, other scenarios outside of the actual Tanium product, right?
So every organization has problems with these silos, and usually it comes down to a data power situation. Folks like their console, they want to keep on it. They have power of the data, they have power to decisions. But what ends up happening is you're in a situation where you're trying to make decisions. And what Tanium does is Tanium is an agent-based solution that's on every endpoint. And the architecture, the way it works, is super, super fast. And I'm not saying it because I work for, I wish I would have had this, in 03 to 05. I didn't get it till 2013. The fact is that I can ask a question across 500,000 endpoints and have the answer back in under 2 minutes now changes my path on how it is I'm going to proceed. So whether that's a 0-day announcement, okay, is this a problem or not? I can check immediately, okay, do I have a problem? If you look at supply chain like Struts, or Log4j, the fact that I can go with confidently ask all my machines and say, yes, I know for confident, here's where the issue is. I remember with Struts, we didn't have the full capability. We got it in about 3 weeks. We had to write a lot of stuff, meaning as a customer, we used Tanium to manage that. We got that data. But then a couple months later, when WannaCry happened, I knew immediately. Within 15 minutes, I was telling the senior leadership, we only have a problem with these 3,500 machines. Get these taken care of. We don't work this weekend. Which is a big difference when you're doing security. It's also a big difference when you're in the middle of an attack and there's a lateral movement. Or one of my favorite scenarios or stories is when the CISO called me on a Sunday afternoon. He had gotten an alert from, I can't remember which agency, that says, hey, there's a rogue version of Putty out there and it's the number 2 download link. Can you tell if it's there? Well, yeah, I can go to the proxy logs. I can go to my recorder and see that, hey, 12 people downloaded this. But then with Tanium, I could ask all 500,000 machines. Of those, can't remember, it's about 2/3 of that Windows machines, because that was the software, and know that of those 12, yes, I could verify that it was downloaded, but only 7 of them actually ran it. And of those 7 of them, I could go back and track and see, because the rogue version, what it was doing was taking your credentials and your one-time password or your token and sending it to a .ru domain. Fortunately, that was blocked, so it couldn't send that. But the fact is, I could confidently, within minutes, say, I know exactly where it's at and I can get it taken care of. The same thing if you're in the middle of IR and you see something and you think, okay, that looks weird. Well, it might look weird on that box, but what if you ask 400,000 other boxes, right, if they're seeing it? Right. And if you don't see it anywhere else, you're like, okay, this is a problem. But if you see it 10,000 other times, like, okay, that's probably a poorly written application in like a screen scrape app or something like that. And then you know what to do. That intel changes your decision process, on how you do it. So that's what's happening. And I would so having all this data, and lines of businesses would come to me and I would say, you've got X number of versions of Java, this many of them are vulnerable. And they were like, no, we don't. And then we would get into this debate, but I could show, because they said, well, you're dealing with old data. I went, no, I don't. The data has 10 minutes old. I mean, that's help. And then what end up happening is it's not, I don't want to be combative. It's like, I'm trying to help you. So I want to give you the data. So we would set up, these jobs, these feeds. I had like over 130 feeds that would go to, Splunk, Elastic, SQL, NoSQL, just send them the data that they wanted so they could take on action on all the time. What it benefited me is I didn't have to train 200 people to get into the console. I could just set the job up and just send the data. So that's what I call data as a service. Oftentimes when people come ask you for something, it's like in a restaurant. I use this farmer chef analogy a lot. So if you go to a restaurant, you don't ask for a list of 10 ingredients. No, you ask for a prepared meal. Lines of businesses often come to you and they're asking for this prepared meal. Tell me everything's vulnerable in my environment, but they want it completely enriched. Like, where is it at? Yeah. How long do I have, that kind of stuff. And oftentimes, if you start doing that, you start wearing the chef's hat, you can never get to all the people asking for these meals. But as a farmer, you can give them all the ingredients they need to go make the meal themselves. So that's where I looked as Tanium, is that I was a super fast digital data harvester. My biggest challenge wasn't even a challenge, because it takes less than 10 minutes to set up one of these feeds, is to distribute that data in a timely way, and then set up our OLAs or SLAs to make sure if they're getting 300 megs average every day, if it drops down to 10, what happened, or they don't get feeds, or they have some acknowledgement thing back that they actually got it. So you're dealing more now with maturing an automated process versus tackling the problem of not having the data to make the decisions for your, whatever your organization or your line of business is.
So you're the HelloFresh of cybersecurity data, is what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I did have to take some of my teams and actually do these test recipes. I remember during Struts getting a heated conversation, and they basically just wanted a red-green report. Just show me where. I said, I don't have, because red. So what I would do is, when I send the data, I do my best to avoid putting the business logic in there. Because if I'm writing content, and with Tanium, writing content is very easy to do. It's super extensible. If you know a scripting language, Bash Shell, PowerShell, Python, VB script, if you can do it on one computer, you can do it on hundreds of thousands of computers. It's super easy to do. So, but if I put logic in there that kind of enriches that and sends it down, so version 2 is good now, but then, we know how many bad patches get released, but now version 3 is good, 2 is bad, having to go change that. But by doing the by doing the farmer thing, we could change the business logic on how the data is filtered and normalized after the fact. And I don't have to change how fast they're getting the data, whatever cadence that is. Sometimes they just needed stuff once a week. Other times, like we sent patching data every 4 hours, still do. So, and then if we're in the middle of an incident where it really matters and we're trying to track remediation because there's a critical vulnerability and we have 72 hours to get it fixed, we might be sitting there refreshing that data, more than every 4 hours, because minutes count, especially if there's an imminent threat or there's an active exploit going on.
IR use cases. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. But for normal day-to-day, we're sending it out.
So the data is the key, obviously. You got to get the data to be able to make smart decisions.
Correct.
But if we step back a bit, you're an agent-based solution, and given the way our world works today, given how many endpoints can be in an organization, how can you ensure that the agent is everywhere it needs to be, especially when we're dealing with a work from anywhere environment, we're dealing with OT environments in some cases? How can you ensure that the agents aren't malfunctioning or broken in some way? Because that's a challenge. So how does Tanium deal with that?
Yeah, very good question. And dealing with agent fatigue is a real thing, a real problem. I remember one of the IT ops people came to me, and I still remember this line. He said, why don't security just buy the endpoints and let us lease time for them to use them to do our jobs? And that was more of a kind of a jab, towards security. So first of all, we had to solve that problem. Number one, the agent itself is extremely robust. It works in a linear chain method, so it knows which machines near it, have the agent and which ones don't have the agent. We then, obviously through deployment, I always start with any agent, we bake it into the golden image to make sure it's there. And then we do two different things. So in a server world where it's even, it's critical in both, but in a server world, you get to a place where an automated solution, so that we would create problem tickets if a machine did not report in with Tanium for 24 hours. We take data from every system we had, where that was other security controls or tools, because we could use Tanium to track where those were through another asset inventory tool. And then Tanium, we would send those in and would timestamp them. And then if they didn't have one, 24 hours, we would create a ticket that automatically went to the person. And I can tell you that works. It sounds like a lot of work. It is, but once you get it done, you can confidently say, I know we're on 99.9% of all the servers. And then when we weren't on one, it was because they followed a decommission process that wasn't part of policy. On the workstation side, it's a little bit different because you've got so much churn, especially in a large organization where you can be reimaging several thousand machines a week. So we did those reconciliations on a weekly basis, to determine, what's there. But we had to put the time in to get the process set up. But once we set the process up, you can automate it. But it is a big deal. To your other point, this worked from anywhere. When COVID hit, that most of the tools, we were starving bandwidth. So you have some other software deployment tools that can only distribute their through VPN traffic, and that would get choked. Well, with Tanium, having in a large organization legacy, on-prem, there's a way we set that up so they can answer. Now with the cloud offering we have, there's basically zero infrastructure. So it doesn't matter if that machine is sitting at home or at a hotel or a coffee shop. We can still see that machine and still do not just get information from it. We can take action. I remember having to do multiple things like distribute forensics tools or handle offboarding or terminations, getting to that machine to do that. But to your point, it's very, very agent help. However, I will say, having managed multiple other tools that had hundreds of servers just to run and try to figure out the orphan situation, is what I call it. With Tanium, that's super, super easy. I mean, very few people were doing that for our entire organization. And in the cloud offering, it's even less because you're not having to worry about the infrastructure on the server side.
How many people in a modest enterprise would it take to manage this?
It depends on how creative you want to be, because you can end up taking a lot of roles. I mean, I have seen enterprises, doing it with 1 to 2 people, and they wish they had 3. I started it with 3 people, but I also expanded the service offering where I was doing this data as a service. So it grew because, again, with Tanium, you can write your own content. So while we have hundreds of sensors and packages that can just do this stuff for you, sometimes in a large organization, you want to get creative. Like we're doing some config management stuff. And so this application needs different type of sensors and those kind of stuff. So I grew that team quite a bit, 6 or 7 people. But you got to remember, it's 500,000 endpoints, over 300,000 employees and contractors. So still relatively small. My joke was I could point to other teams other than I formerly managed that would take, 10 people to run that I could do with 2 people, just because the Tanium infrastructure itself is super small. I mean, I ran an AV product that took 120 servers to manage 300,000 endpoints. With Tanium, I could do 500,000 endpoints with basically 2 core servers and about 6 zone servers that basically acted as proxies.
Wow.
So that's quite a force multiplier.
It's huge. It's a huge difference. It also makes it easier when you're doing change controls, because you're only dealing. I had a 3-prong system, so we had a primary. Well, actually 2 primary. We call them primary and secondary, but they were both load balancing everything, and then a third cold standby for our DR tests that we would bring in. And it is huge. That's a huge difference from managing an AV vendor where we started with 120. I did optimize it down to 70 servers, but it takes almost 5 people just to manage that and all the version certification testing you have to do. It's always why I like the Tanium cloud offering, and every vendor is moving to this, is that whole certification process. Because when you're doing change controls, I don't care if you're an IT ops engineer or security engineer, it's supposed to be muscle memory, right? You're supposed to go in there, this is what I expect to happen, you've done your testing, you've done all this stuff, and you do it and you get out. And I was fortunate in that the team I had, well, one, it was one of the disciplines I required them to follow all the time, is that if it's not muscle memory, it's like, go back to our sports analogy, you're not going to show up on game day, or worse yet, championship day, and you've never been to a practice. You don't know the playbook. You don't know what's going on. You should know. Now, granted, things are going to go wrong in production. They just do. But because you know it confidently enough, you know when to back out. When to go, okay, we need to back this change out. Here's the process. And then given from a leadership standpoint, given your engineers the flexibility and the confidence to know that they can do that. I trust you. You're going to get it. Get it done. If something happens, we have to pull out. We're going to explain, what's going on, and we'll do it the next time. But yes, when you're dealing with that much and your infrastructure is so small, such a small percentage, it's huge. That's why when people figured it out, I didn't have a turnover problem. Matter of fact, people would always want to come to the team and when we would bring people over to the team, they would see how we were doing stuff. They were like, wow, we had 3 people manage 800 servers for these 4 applications. We could have done all of that with less than 1 person with Tanium because the tool is there. But again, back to our data broker or data as a service, when you have access to that data, and typically what I've seen in an organization, people have these feudal kingdoms, they have their fiefdoms that they want control or power, and that's a political issue. You have to have good leadership that recognizes that and will address it when it happens. But you can break down a lot of politics and a lot of silos between these organizations if you just share what you know. It goes back to what you learned in kindergarten. If you just share it, put it and do it responsibly, you make sure you have SLAs and OLAs, you have your RBAC controls set up the way they're supposed to be, so nobody accidentally gets themselves in trouble or does something they shouldn't do. But by doing that data as a service, it'll mature an organization. It liberates an organization. I remember Wells Fargo. I mean, everybody remembers in the news quite a bit. But I remember one of the regulatory things, one of the most stressful times. It took me 2 weeks to get people to agree. Fortunately, I had leadership above me that was helping with this, to even agree on what we're counting. Meaning, we're going to report to the regulators all security controls and the protection on all of them for all perimeter devices. And they couldn't agree on what a perimeter device was. An endpoint with email is essentially on the perimeter. And because we have no edge anymore, we don't, the endpoint's the edge. Actually, I've heard it said the browser is the edge. Actually, every application the edge. Hence, the legacy zero trust and network is moved into zero trust. We got to authenticate the process, the application, the person, the machine, all of it. To be able to do zero trust correctly. But it goes back to these philosophical discussions of definitions of what words are. And it took us 3 weeks to get to the denominator. But when everybody agreed, this is what we're counting, and this is what everybody's going to report to. I use this saying, raise your hand if you're not here. If somebody comes and says, hey, I'm 96% patched, I would say 96% patched to what? Because according to what I see, you're 68% patched. And they would go, no, 96. I went, well, first of all, you don't cover this many machines, and of the patches that you're covering, you're only counting the ones that are certified. And from where I sit, the attackers don't care. That doesn't mean it's a bad grade. It means that leadership, the board, needs to know we've got a gap, and we need to figure out how to put mitigating controls around these things that this agent won't cover, or this tool doesn't cover, or we have just a sloppy process gap that they're not getting installed and turned on all the time, and nobody's monitoring it correctly, and those kind of things. So when you get to that denominator, again, that requires solid real-time data, near real-time data that everybody can trust in, and not a spreadsheet from 30 or 60 days ago that has gone through 5 or 6 hands, and nobody knows if it's true or accurate anymore. That's what it requires to get to that maturity level, to have this data as a service that everybody benefits from.
Well, I had some other questions, Tim, but you answered them in the midst of that.
Well, good.
So I appreciate that. No, it's hugely helpful. Like I remember the first time we got a SIM on the enterprise side, and one of the questions you answered was when IT realized that we had the system with all the logs centralized in it. Anytime they would have any kind of downtime or outage or anything like that, they turned to us to do root cause analysis, and we couldn't do security work, because this would happen so often. They basically co-opt us to do that work. So I think you gave some good guidance there on how organizations can provide the data, like the HelloFresh model, not the like I'm going to give you the ingredients, but you're still going to do the prep. You're still going to cook it yourself.
And that happens all the time, not just with incident response, with attacks and 0 days. It happens with IT ops and outages. And what ends up happening, like you said, you get co-op, because then your best people get sucked into doing that. And the old adage, teach a person how to fish. You've got to put processes in that enables people to be able to do what it is, that they can do, and look out for that. So yeah, we see that now. I mean, when the advising consulting I'm doing right now, I see that a lot. It's just people that, their best people get co-op and they can't move forward because they're always fighting fires, and that's another part of this. You can't. Yeah, we do have to fight fires, but oftentimes we have security controls that are broken. It's like having fire trucks that don't work, and you don't want to figure out the fire truck doesn't work, when the fire happens.
When you need
you got to be testing those controls all the time, and you can use this data and broker that data to make that happen, if you set it up correctly.
Well, Tim, this was excellent. Thanks so much for joining us today on Enterprise Security Weekly.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it. And anybody can just reach out to me, tim.morris@Tanium, or go check out our website. There's plenty of information there. We'd love to talk to you if you're trying to get through this. Not just, again, it's about, you cannot make, the best decisions come from the best intel, and that intel is from fresh data, not from what you got 30 days ago.
True words. You can also visit securityweekly.com/Tanium to learn more. And stick around. We'll be back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news.